Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Now, I first came across our next guest about 2 years ago. She gave an interview, a very emotional and a very difficult to listen to, it must be said, interview to Sky News. And I remember actually playing some of that. I might have even played all of it on one of our Sunday morning newspaper review shows. I think she's a very courageous lady. She was among a group of children whom were abused by political figures during the 1980s and 1990s. We're going to talk about that, and also the news that Mike Veal, the chief constable with Wiltshire Police, the news that he's claimed that the allegations against former Prime Minister Edward Heath are true. Now, this is important because when we've covered this, and we've tried to cover this extensively over the last couple of years, when we've covered it, we've been mindful of the fact that largely national television, national radio, and it must be said most of the print media have tried to label the claims made by people like our next guest. They've tried to label them as fantasy. They've tried to dismiss them as a hoax. And there's still some of that going on. So it was terrific to hear that the Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police is standing firm, saying that the allegations made against Edward Heath are true and that he wants to see this investigation to its conclusion. And of course, we're going to follow that very closely. So let's welcome our next guest to the programme then. Got in touch with her today. Glad that she's coming on. She has a case that's ongoing and it's pending, so we won't certainly be mentioning any names. We're going to talk generally about her and her experience, what she's doing now. We'll also get her thoughts on, as I said, the historic child sex abuse inquiry, because while I would be lying if I said we are inundated, we're not inundated, but we do get regular emails and tweets from victims and survivors. Some victims prefer to be called survivors, and they say we have no confidence that we're ever going to see a conclusion to this inquiry. Let's welcome our next guest to the programme. It's Esther Baker. Esther, welcome to the programme. How are you?
Hello, I'm not too bad, thank you.
It's lovely to talk to you. Not about the subjects that we're talking about, but I meant what I said when I saw your interviews with Sky, and you did some interviews with national newspapers as well. I thought you had some courage, Esther. You had real guts and real determination, because a lot of people who've gone through what you went through, they'd prefer to remain anonymous, and that's completely understandable, and you know, you'd admire anybody for doing that. But I was really, kind of blown away by your determination. Why did you waive your right to anonymity at the time? That's always interested me, that.
Yeah, well, I waived my anonymity at the time. There was two reasons, to be honest with you. The first was that I wanted to get the story out there and to let the other people know that, somebody was coming forward, and that, it was a good time to speak out. The second reason was that I was made aware that some people had actually contacted some of the people who had abused me and told them that I was going forward to the National Child Abuse Inquiry. And I then felt, to be honest, safer by speaking out and putting myself out there.
Imagine that. You were thinking, this is so serious. If I get my name out there, it'll be difficult for anybody to maybe come and do me any harm or to try and unsettle me in any way. Can I ask you this, Esther? How important was the story breaking about what Jimmy Savile did? How important was that to your own story as well? Because a lot of victims or survivors, and some victims have criticised me, said, don't call me a victim, Richie, I'm a survivor, and I suppose I understand that as well. They said that the Savile thing gave them the courage, right, I'll be believed now. Did that mean anything to you at the time?
I think at the time it didn't really to me, just because I still didn't think I'd be believed. And it's quite obvious that, some of us aren't and will never be by some people. And I think that, that's something that we'd all like to see change, but probably won't do. But I think I've got to a stage now where I know that the people that matter believe, and I think that's all that's all we can go for, to be honest with you.
And tell me,
that's what I've learned over the last couple of years.
the people that matter, Esther, are those the people that you love, your friends and your family? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, friends and family. They're very much behind me, which has been great because I'd not told most of my family before it came out on Sky. So to have those people sort of rally around you, that's been a really big sort of blessing to me.
They didn't know you were doing the expose with Sky. How did they react when they saw it?
Shocked.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There was shock and silence for a couple of days. But then, like I said, they've been absolutely wonderful since then.
You're I'll get criticised for this. You know, people say, "Oh, you're too kind." Often with people, Richie, but you can't not be. I can't not admire you for the courage that you've shown. Some of our listeners won't have heard of you. A lot of them have. I think most of them have, judging by the contact I received after I announced on social media today you were coming on. So a lot of our listeners are well aware of who you are. You, of course, are far too clever and experienced to mention any names. So not mentioning any names, you can basically give our listeners, if it's not too difficult, Esther, I know you've probably gotten used to talking about it now, give them an idea of what happened to you when you were younger, what sort of things happened to you and that you experienced.
People say that we get used to it, but I don't, to be honest. I was abused from the age of, from what I can remember, 3 or 4 by a family member. And when I'd got a little bit older, I was then introduced to what they'd now call a paedophile ring. And that went on for several years. When that had finished, for various reasons, I ended up in what would now be called a grooming gang, and then that led on to domestic violence as an adult. So it's been difficult.
And you've told the police, and again, we're not going to mention anybody, because it's important that the people who did these things are brought to justice. The last thing in the world, I suppose, the thing these people want more than anything is, before any court cases, they'd love to be named, I suppose, kind of perversely, because it would give them some sort of recourse then to put a halt to the justice system. So we're not going to mention people, but the paedophile ring, and we're talking about the woodland area that you were taken to, and other children. The people involved were well-known people, weren't they? Yeah,
they were and are some still pretty well known.
And when you look back on that, Esther, on the fact that these well-known people were doing these unspeakable things to children, when you look back on it, how do you feel about the fact that they were able to operate in the way they did? And I'm not trying to sanitise this now. What they did was the worst crime I think you can commit against anybody. How do you think, looking back on it, they were able to operate as they did without fear of being caught or being arrested?
Because the police at the time knew what was going on. They certainly had cover from certain sections of, in certain police forces. They knew that if anything sort of ever was said or found, that it would just be covered over, and it's still true to some extent today. I think there's a lot of people that believe that whatever they've done, they still will be getting away with it.
Funny you say that, and I don't mean funny, obviously, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but one of the things we hear from, I've been contacted by people who have been abused, and David Icke has been a lot over the years. A lot of people have gone to David. This is before Savile, when people had, I suppose, they had nobody to turn to. People who were older than you now, of course, Esther, because you're a very young woman, older people whom had experienced this, and they said to David, in fact, I had an email from somebody a couple of days ago who said, my abuser is still very active in public life. And I would never mention any names, obviously, because, we're professional and you're respectful and intelligent, so you won't do it. But I know of at least 4 or 5 men working in public life, either working in politics or working in another form of public life, well-known people, who have multiple allegations made against them by people whom, to me, seem very credible. And yet, I keep picking up the paper, and I guess you're a bit like this as well, Esther. You look at the paper and you think, when are we going to read that these people were arrested? Is there a bit of that? Is that how you feel about this when you see it?
Oh, definitely. And, I've been told in certain cases that people would have been arrested if it wasn't for their job role. I'm trying to think what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not, obviously.
All you have to worry about is is 2 things. 1, not naming anybody, or 2, not giving any clues as to anybody's identity. If you don't do that, you can say whatever you want. And I wouldn't put you wrong. The laws of libel and sub judice and all this, I know a little bit about it. Don't give any clues to anybody, identity, and don't name anybody. And you can talk about what happened to you. You're entitled to do that.
Well, I know that in at least one case, somebody's been told that the person that abused them would have been arrested if they weren't as public as they are. And that is not so much for protecting them at this stage, but it's because of the pressure that it would then bring onto the police force from the media. So in a lot of ways, the media is being quite culpable in helping this cover-up.
The media's... We criticise the media a lot on this programme. I think their behaviour around this particular issue is beyond the pale when you have national radio presenters who've never met you or anybody like you, and I know they haven't because they admit as much when they present their programmes, never having spoken to somebody like you, to call it a witch hunt and to call it a hoax and a fantasy must be deeply hurtful. Now, I know you said that, as long as you're family and friends, and you're a bit like me in that respect, I don't worry about what people think about me. What happened to you has not happened to me. I wouldn't compare myself to you, Esther, but as long as the people who I care about know me to be a decent bloke, sod everybody else. And I admire that about you, but at the same time, it's got to be hurtful when these people are saying that people like you are attention-seeking fantasists. And it's not just you, of course. It's been said about so many people who've come forward. Has that changed your opinion of society, Esther, because we grew up, didn't we? We grew up thinking that the newspapers will protect us, the news, they'll go after people when people commit wrongs and do things that are wrong. Has that changed your opinion of the media?
Oh, definitely. It's been a very eye-opening 2 years. I suppose think that there was almost some law that newspapers had to print the truth and they had to, have proof that what they were saying was right. And obviously, I've learnt that doesn't apply whatsoever because there's been some shocking things written about me that I read and it's just like, it's not right and I can prove it's not right. How are they allowed to print that? But I've seen it happen, obviously not just to me, but people I know time and time again. And it really has changed my way of thinking, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does, yeah. It's not made you bitter, it's just made you a bit more streetwise, I suppose. Yeah,
definitely. Because I always used to say I was never really sort of a conspiracy theorist, I guess.
Yeah.
In any way, shape or form. I used to, read some things and kind of roll my eyes.
Yeah.
But since the media's been involved in my case, I really can understand how media can put a spin on things now. And I really can understand that some people are just trying to get the truth out there, and it's a real fight.
Of course.
They seem to be able to print a lot of stuff that isn't true, but then, as you said earlier, there are people coming forward with accusations about the same people that are in public life now.
And they're not connected.
And we don't hear a word of it.
We don't hear a word of it, and they're not connected. This is the thing, and Mike Veal, the chief constable at Wiltshire Police, made this point, didn't he? He said, we've had multiple accounts of abuse by former Prime Minister Edward Heath from credible people who have no connection whatsoever. And the police they have at their disposal the tools to find out. I mean, if they wanted to find out if there's any connection between you and me, Esther, they can find out quickly enough. They've got people who are experts. They can go into internet search engines. They can find out if you and I have been emailing, if we've been concocting a story. They know very quickly that the first time we've ever spoken is now. You know, it's very easy to determine that. Can I ask you, there were other children who were abused by some of these well-known, powerful people. Have you been in touch, and of course we're going to name nobody, have you been in touch with any of these other survivors, especially in the last couple of years, or even since it happened, Esther? Have you looked them up? Do you know where they are and how they're doing?
No, I've very much left all of that side to the police. Somebody approached me saying that they thought they knew one of them, and I've just asked them to just pass that directly to the police and not involve me. I don't want to know names. You don't want to taint any, because again, no. It might be said, oh look, they're conspiring to commit a hoax. Tell us about when you went to the police and told them that famous and powerful people were abusing you and other children, and that the police were covering it up. And I think at one instance, Esther, I remember you telling the journalist from Sky when they came to visit you, in one instance a police officer was standing guard while this was happening. How did the police today, how did they take that when you were saying that? Were they sympathetic to you? Did you think that you were getting a fair hearing from them? Yeah, I think I've been really quite lucky in that the police dealing with my case, and obviously the police that took my statements, they have been really, really good. I remember I did a radio interview with somebody else back about the same time I did the Sky News, and I described the two police that were taking my statements as poker players, because they just never gave sort of any emotion, any they didn't show any shock, or they weren't fazed by names or job roles or anything like that. Wow. And I think that's, to their credit. Do you think, they've been very good. I suppose I might get a bit of criticism for saying this now, but do you think that their demeanour spoke towards them not being surprised because they've heard it before, or them not being surprised because they're just trained to take everything in their stride no matter what they hear? Because if I was listening to you naming names, I think my jaw would drop anyway. Whether I thought you were credible or not, I think my jaw would be on the table. How do you feel that went? Do you think they were stoically, still and unresponsive because they are just getting used to it, or how do you see that? Well, I think I'm looking that they do seem very well trained. The officers that I've sort of been speaking to and dealing with, and they've obviously, I've known them for sort of nearly 2 years now, and they've been the same throughout. So I think it is just really good training. Bless them. Women, which has been good for me, because I've dealt with police in the past when I've tried to report, and they've not dealt with it. And tell us about that, Esther, because that's very serious. That for everybody, and I've heard from survivors who've said the same thing. Tell us about going to the police over the years and saying, "Listen, I'd like to report this happened," and the negative experiences. Give us an example of what happened. Again, I have to be careful of not sharing too much, because obviously there's a lot of it's not in the public domain. Yeah. I think what is in the public domain is I did try to report probably about 5 or 6 years ago now. and the officer that came out to me was very, I wouldn't say dismissive, but she seemed just not interested, I suppose. And at the time, I didn't name anyone to her because I wasn't ready to kind of deal with all of that. But whether it was because she wasn't a specialist officer, the experience was just completely different. And I think in different areas, these things are dealt with differently, which is something that really needs to change. Because I'm dealing with, I'm just trying to think now, 5 force areas at the moment, and each one works in a different way, which is just mind-blowing, to be honest.
Bit disconcerting because they have different ways of dealing with things and asking questions and making inquiries. I suppose that... Yeah, go ahead, Esther.
Even just almost, I suppose the priority level seems to be different in different areas, if that makes sense to you. You know, obviously it's the same crime basically being reported in different areas, but some areas haven't even don't even seem to have picked up the investigations yet, whereas some are obviously nearly completed. So
why do you think that is? Is it down to maybe that they're overloaded, or do you think it might be down to something like the sort of things we heard before? I mean, we have heard from former Scotland Yard detectives, haven't we, who've gone on the record. In fact, they told Exaro News, whom you spoke with as well at one time, they told Exaro News, which is now gone, detectives said, well, back in the day, we were told to stay away. We were told to stop investigating. Are you concerned, Esther, that it's still going on, that?
I'm concerned that in some areas it will still be going on. You know, I know of at least one area where they have some very credible allegations going forward, and it's nothing to do with my case. I know that they've got some very credible allegations, and because it's somebody prominent, they don't appear to be, you know, going anywhere near that.
Well, you know, I think you've listened to 1 or 2 episodes of the programme, so you'll probably know that my conspiracy theory, and it is a conspiracy theory, is that this is an epidemic, Esther, I believe, from what I've come to understand in the last few years. And of course, I grew up, as I was, getting into my teens, it exploded in the Republic of Ireland. And, we learned about the extent of the clerical sex abuse in Ireland. And I think, should anybody really want to start digging in Ireland, the political class and their involvement in paedophilia, I believe that that's something which could explode in the Republic of Ireland as well. I believe ultimately that the establishment are terrified about people learning that this is real, because their control over us is derived from our belief that they're there to do good for us. And that's why most people not most people, but that's why the majority of people turn out and vote every 5 years and vote in the elections. And I think there's a real terror that if the scale of this becomes known, that it's going to tear at the fabric, I suppose, of society. But that's just my opinion on it. I mean, I suppose it's fair to ask you, do you think the scale of it is beyond what most people can comprehend? Do you think that, as we might say here, do you agree with us, Esther, that we've not even scratched the surface yet? Definitely.
I think you only have to look at what's become made known recently about abuse in sports.
Yeah.
You know, one day it was, nobody I guess had really thought about it, or thought, there was only a select few, coaches in some obscure leagues that had kind of crept through. To a few weeks later, it was known that it's so widespread they can't even almost begin to look into it at the moment. And I think if it wasn't for certain sections of the media, I think the same would be happening with the establishment abuse.
That's really important.
I think that's how widespread it is. Because to be honest, it doesn't matter what your job is, what your profession is. You know, these people are everywhere in every profession. But the establishment appears to be trying to hide that it's as prevalent as, you know, amongst politicians as it is amongst football coaches. And it's only the job title that's making people say, oh no, you know, people like that couldn't do that kind of thing. You know, the same as it was before Savile and others in the music industry, the TV industry. That came as a big shock. Now we've had football. Hopefully next we'll get the truth on politicians.
You make a good point as well about the media. I tried to make this point on the programme the other day, and that is, while it's generally a bad media in terms of, you know, what it reports on and how it reports, there are still a lot of good men and women working in it who are trying to expose things as best they can. There's
plenty that are really trying their best, and I've over the last year or so I've been speaking to quite a few who've all got information on somebody that they're desperate to get out, but they're not allowed. As soon as they sort of tender that into the higher people. I'm sorry, I'm not very good with the media terms.
No, you're very good. Don't knock yourself. It's very good.
As soon as they pass that into the editors and the higher up people, then it just gets shut down straight away. And I've seen it with 7 or 8 different media agencies on the same person.
And of course, one of the things we're talking about at the moment is an attempt to regulate the press under a state body. The only state body recognised at the moment is Max Mosley's regulatory body called Impress, and this is very dangerous as well. You see, the government or the state trying to regulate the press in the way they want to do that, because ultimately, I would have to believe that this particular issue is one of those things they want to take control over. They want to control the flow of information. I mean, people don't want credible, articulate women like you speaking on programs, Esther, whether it's this program or another program. They don't want that happening. They don't want these issues being discussed, as painful as they are, because the more you get out there and people like you and speak about it and say, well, look, this is what happened to me. Some very powerful people were involved. Those people should be in prison now, but because of who they are, they've been protected. The more people hear that, the more we'll get closer to the day when we have that explosion, and I can't think of a better term, that explosion that we had in Ireland, when the lid just comes off and people see it for what it is, So how do you feel about the inquiry, the child sex abuse inquiry? I think is on its 4th chairperson now. Chairwoman.
Yeah.
Chair lady, right? Yeah, chair lady. I think
she might not appreciate that, but
she might not appreciate that. No, I look at it now and I think, to me, and I can't prove it. Of course, it's just a gut feeling. It looks like, and I had to look this word up, obfuscation. I had to look up the old Oxford Dictionary. Obfuscation, putting roadblocks in the way of it to drag it out. How do survivors, and I know you chat on social media to other survivors, how do you feel, if there is even a collective feeling, because you might all feel differently, and I'm sure you do, about this inquiry? Is there any optimism that this inquiry is serious, that it actually wants to get to the bottom of it? Or are people beginning to think it's a stitch-up? What do you think?
It's a very difficult one. I'll start with that, and there is a lot of differing opinions on it, shall we say. In my opinion and my opinion alone, because I can't speak for everybody on this, because there is so many different opinions, I think it was set up with good intent. I think that there has been a lot of roadblocks thrown in it. Some of those have been intentional, because I don't believe that they could have made quite so many mistakes unintentionally, to be quite honest with you. I think that people were put in there to destabilise it from the inside, which I believe somebody's admitted to recently.
Putting somebody in...
Destabilise it from the inside.
Esther, let me just stop you there, because that's serious, that. I'm glad you've brought that up, because again, none of us can prove this, but it's something I suspect. You think that from the get-go, people have been working from the inside to make a complete bags of it, basically?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and that's something that has been looked into by certain sections of the media, and they've not been able to go any further with their investigations, shall we say. I think the inquiry as it stands now is two-pronged. Obviously, you've got the section that's based in London, which, while there have been some improvements and a lot of good people working on it, I think there's still issues that are going to crop up in the future. But there's also the Truth Project section of it, which nobody really talks about or writes about, but that's basically where anybody can go in and tell their story. I've met with some of the people that have been working on the Truth Project, and in my opinion, the Truth Project is the best branch of it, if that makes sense. That seems to have been set up with good intent. And there are really good people in that.
Do you expect, have you yet been asked to give evidence to the inquiry? Has this happened yet? And if not, do you expect to be asked to give evidence?
Again, it's two-pronged. I could go to the Truth Project, but as my case is ongoing, I would leave that personally until after my case is finished. There is talk about a Westminster strand being started up, and I have been informed by the inquiry 2 or 3 times from the wonderful London section that I'm not allowed to meet with Alexis Jade to discuss the concerns I've got with the inquiry in case I'm a core participant in the future on that strand. So, yeah, it's fun.
Just want to remind her,
I can't really talk to them in case they might want to talk to me.
In case they want to talk to you, fair enough. I just want to remind our listeners, we've got probably Esther for another 5 minutes or thereabouts. Esther Baker is on the programme. I'm not patronising her, and I'm not being in any way. You know, she's incredibly courageous. I mean, it takes some absolute guts to do what she did. You know, Esther's she works full time. She's a professional woman, and you know, she's respected in her community. And to talk about this and to waive her rights to anonymity, it takes enormous courage. She was abused at a woodland area and at Dolphin Square by a paedophile ring that contained among its members some very, very well-known people. Back in my commercial days, I would have been fired for saying what I'm going to say now, but I'm going to say it anyway. She's telling the truth. I believe her, and I know that everybody else associated with this programme believes her. Smart women with jobs and with families and with lives don't disrupt their lives by going to the police and making allegations like the ones Esther made. Number one, because they wouldn't do it. Number two, because they just bloody well wouldn't do it. And number three, because they know that there are consequences for making allegations about people that are untrue. The things that Esther has been talking about have been correlated by hundreds of people, maybe thousands, who've gone to police officers over the years to name the very same people. Greville Janner, Leon Britton, Peter Morrison, people who've gotten away with it, and many, many, many more. And her case is ongoing now. Can I ask you this? Are you optimistic? I mean, do you think the better side of humanity will mean that you'll get justice? And I think I've read somewhere before, Esther, that it's not about revenge for you. It's about stopping these bastards, basically, from continuing to do it. Do you think that will happen? Do you think we'll get to a stage where, because of the efforts of you and others, that they won't be able to do it anymore?
I hope so. I don't know whether that'll be on cases that are ongoing now, or whether it'll be something in the future. But I think we get a bit more hope every now and again, and then we get kicked down a bit more, and
yeah,
it's a roller coaster. So it depends what day you ask me on, I'm afraid, for that question.
And the Westminster, before we part company today, the Westminster aspect to all this is very, very serious, and we didn't get into Dolphin Square too much. This is the apartment block, of course, where unspeakable things definitely happened. You were there, of course, as a child. We didn't talk about that, but for our listeners, how significant in all of this is that particular address in Dolphin Square?
I wouldn't be allowed to comment on that, I'm afraid.
Right.
I'm sorry. I'm just not allowed to go near that one.
It's come up so many times. And can I ask you this finally, Esther, and then we'll leave it for now. How? And I ask this of everybody I've ever met who's had a bad life, who's had a difficult life, who's had to deal with abuse of any kind. How do you progress then? In the meantime, is it about seeing through the process that you started? How do you live with it? How do you come to terms with it? How do you heal from all of that?
I think, again, people heal in different ways. For me, it's on day to day, just one foot in front of the other, and trying to help other people as much as possible. That's what gets me through. Trying to be able to change things to make things better for others. Then it feels like there's a purpose behind it. It feels like, there's a reason for it. If what's happened to me can, stop it happening to somebody else, then at least there's been a reason for it all.
You remind me of a friend of mine from Waterford City who's in Dublin now. His name is Derek Power, one of the nicest guys you could ever meet. Derek was abused by a bishop. Like yourself, dreadful things happened to him. And even though he was a friend, I interviewed him on the radio in Waterford years ago. And I said to him at the end, stupid question, I said, are you happy? Or could you be happy? Or, could you be happy in the future? And he said something I'll never forget. It stayed with me for a long time. Do you know what he said, Esther? And I wonder, does this ring any bells at you? He said, Richie, he said, I'm happy, and I go about doing things until I get a certain smell. It might be a cigarette, it might be a pipe, it might be a smell of some food cooking, and things will come back. I'm happy until I go into a room, and the room feels weird, and it feels wrong, and I get vibes, and I get very, very down and very depressed, and I'm happy. And then he described another situation. Does that mean anything to you, that?
Oh, definitely.
There's always reminders, right?
Yeah, the feelings that can just switch is, I understand that.
Esther, thanks very much for coming on the programme. We didn't get into Heath too much. I guess finally you're delighted that, who wouldn't be, that the Chief Constable in Wiltshire is determined to take seriously and has said that he believes the allegations. He's determined that, they'll be treated seriously and properly, and those people will be treated with the respect they deserve, those victims. That must be a great relief, that, for a lot of people yesterday. What do you think?
Yeah, I was really relieved, and it gave me a lot of hope. I've kind of had to temper that with, we heard the same thing from Hogan Howe and Midland, and then it sort of caused a big backlash. So I'm a bit nervous about what the backlash will be on that.
On him, even?
We'll find out. Yeah, on him and the survivors.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit nervous about that, but if he's determined, then he needs to know that survivors are behind him, and the backlash.
It was an honour.
Calms down. Yeah.
It was an honour to speak with you, and I don't say that lightly. Esther, you've got tremendous courage. Please stay in touch with the programme. And as this progresses, we'll follow it. We're connected on Twitter anyway. And I see you tweet out stuff there every day. I'll share your Twitter handle later on so people can follow you. Thanks for doing it. Continued success to you in the future. An amazing woman. I'd be absolutely proud to know you for having the courage to do what you've done. And I believe there will be a day, and that day is coming, when these people will be outed for who they are and they won't be able to do it ever again. Thank you so much, Esther. Look after yourself.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much.
It was an honour. Esther Baker there on the line to us. Came across Esther a couple of years ago when, excuse me, she gave an interview to Sky Television, a short interview. They came to see her about allegations that she made against a number of prominent individuals, some of them still very prominent, in business, in life, in, say it for me, in politics. Now, my friend Jean Ann has just reminded me, Michael Mansfield, when he was on this programme, was asked by me, why did he think he wasn't invited to lend, excuse me, I'm feeling a bit sore today, my back is a bit sore, to lend a hand. Why wasn't Michael Mansfield invited to lend a learned ear and a learned hand to the inquiry? And Michael laughed out loud. And I remember he did say in the interview that he believed he wouldn't be invited because he would be asking questions that would be considered not pertinent. Not pertinent. Michael Mansfield, the human rights barrister.